Welcome to DigitalK.
So hi everyone, I have 15 minutes, so I'm going to be very quick, concise, and hopefully helpful and interesting. And so let's jump into it. I'm going to talk about sales for startups. And these are some lessons from Silicon Valley that hopefully will be valuable or interesting for you. So first of all, who am I? Marvin, I'm partner at 500 Startups. 500 Startups has actually been around now close to 8 years. We have actually funded over 2,300 companies. I actually run the accelerator program based in San Francisco, so our core program. And actually what we're really well known for, and why we actually started the accelerator program was the fact that if you look at the reason that actually most startups fail, it's not because the product sucks. In most cases, especially these days, the product's actually pretty good. The main reason actually most startups fail is because they can't get the product in the hands of their customers, or they cannot find customers. And this is ultimately what sales is about. And so unfortunately, if you look at what the popular view, the Hollywood view of sales, is actually very negative, right? So this is from a scene from like Glenn Ross, great movie, one of my favorite movies, but it actually portrays sales as this thing where you're jamming this thing down people's throats of stuff that they don't want, right? You're selling things and pushing things that people don't want. And actually, this was actually my view of sales, probably up until about 15 years ago. I was actually a marketing person at Yahoo. And I remember and I had to stop and think one time where I'm like, wait a minute, who are the folks who are actually making most of the money for the company? Who are the folks who are actually driving most of the business for Yahoo? It was actually salespeople, and these are the people who actually got paid the most. It actually kind of woke me up. And actually I thought about this as I started learning the business of sales, and I ended up running several business groups at Yahoo, sales teams as well too. I built probably close to 40 sales teams when I was at Yahoo. What I actually came to realize was that sales is actually probably the most important function in business, period, and actually behooves you to actually learn more about how to do it well. And what I learned about sales in general was that what true good sales is about finding the right customer, trying to qualify them and make sure that they actually need what you want and give it to them. Very, very simple, but this is unfortunately not the view that a lot of people have. And particularly when you look at sales in general for startups, 70% of your time is actually, as a founder, should be driven by sales, right? Think about that. Raising money, hiring employees, selling, getting customers, sharing your vision from a PR perspective, right? Selling your vision to press, selling your company eventually, right? These are all things driven by the basics of sales. And so if you think about it, this is arguably the most critical factor of a startup success, of a founder success. And so before we go into sales, I talk about a couple of things that you actually need to have to do this well. And so there's a great saying, fail to plan, plan to fail, right? And I think unfortunately when a lot of people go and do sales, when founders do sales, they actually do it in a way that's actually not very well informed. And so I'll go through a couple steps that you have to go through before you actually start the sales process. So number one, it's positioning. A great book if you've actually never seen this book before. It's been around since the 80s. And it's about understanding the category they're in, right? And what it talks about is the fact that the humans are really, really busy, right? We actually don't have a lot of time. We're busy, think about a lot of different things. And so a great example he thinks about, just when you think about soda or pop, right? The first thing that comes to your mind, unfortunately, is probably Coke. Right? Second thing that comes to mind is actually Pepsi. So in every single category, whether it's a product category, service category, there's usually one or two things that stick in your head. And the whole idea about position, trying to understand the category that you're in. That's number one. Number two, learn to tell your story. I love the example of Pixar. I've mentioned this many times, but the reason Pixar's movies are so well done, I ask people, guess how much time Pixar actually spends in the storyline and the plot line versus how much time they actually spend in actually animating the film. They actually spend 80% of the time in actually figuring out the storyline. And the reason for that is because one of the ways to shortcut people's sort of minds is through storytelling, right? Storytelling is not just bludgeoning people with numbers, right? 50% better, whatever. They don't care about that. It's actually using stories, because you think about stories and how powerful they are. Even about hundreds of years ago, even up until now, a lot of times the myths and stories are passed along, sitting around the campfire. They still work. And so the reality is that for sales is actually about storytelling. Understanding, taking that storytelling and actually figuring out your pitch, right? How do you pitch what you're doing in 1 minute, in 2 minutes, in 4 minutes, in 5 minutes? Having that in mind and actually doing your homework to make sure that works really well is critical. Second thing, making sure that what you're talking about is actually very simple to understand. So simple to understand that your grandma will actually know what you're doing, right? That is about clarity. And unfortunately, most sales pitches are not clear at all. I hear these things, I'm like, I don't know what you work on. And if I don't know what you're working on, it's very, very hard for me to help you. It's very, very hard for me to invest in you or buy from you. Competition, understanding the competitive landscape, right? What does a competitive landscape look like? And then more importantly, why are you different and why are you better compared to your competitors out in the market? Basic homework that a lot of people do not do. Knowing your product, very, very critical. What does your product do? What's the benefit of it? Know who your customers are. For startups in early stage, you have to be, it's not serving everybody, maybe eventually, maybe in 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years as a startup, but in the beginning it's about figuring out what is the specific segment, subcategory that you're serving. And the more narrow it is, the better, because that's actually your wedge into the market. Then based on that, knowing your channels, what's the best way to reach out to them? Could be from B2B sales, right? Direct face-to-face salespeople, could be through shops, could be online, could be telesales, all these things, trying to understand where your customers hang out and what's the best way to communicate with them. All right, so quick live example. I have 6 minutes. I'm going to blitz through this. And so selling like chickens, right? So the example is, when you have an idea, when you first come up with the idea, the sales process is very different. Your sales process is about customer discovery, lean startup, trying to understand the problem, trying to understand if this is actually more about what the customer is looking for, right? And if it's the right customer, and whether it's actually you have an idea of actually how to solve that problem. Second thing, when you actually start building the product, it's actually about you figure out what the problem is, you figure out the market, then you're trying to figure out, okay, can I build something that actually solves the problem that my customers have? So it's actually more of evangelism sales. Next one, once you've actually built the product and launched it, the key is actually trying to figure out how much can you actually get for this. And so pricing, trying to learn how to charge and what the price about this. And also trying to make sure that what you have actually fits at least like 70-80% of actually the customer's needs. Right? And in some cases, you might even have to give away for free to see sort of what the usage is. Next of all is once you get it out to the customer, how do you scale this over a bigger number of people? And so I'm going to go into specific examples. First of all, the other things you need to think about, very tactical things. As a startup, you should not hire salespeople. I think as a startup founder, the first salesperson is you. All right? And you are responsible for selling, because you cannot sell your product, and this is the biggest mistake I see a lot of startup founders, particularly from the CE region, actually make, is they think when they go into the US market, they go, I'm just going to hire a bunch of US salespeople, they'll take care of the problem for me. Wrong. US salespeople are great at selling themselves. They may not be great about selling your product or selling your service. And actually, you're better off doing this yourself because you actually learn more. You're not outsourcing the learning. And in your first customer, the biggest thing is actually you are responsible for getting your first customer. And that's what actually your focus should be when you're early stage startup, right? If you can't close the first customer yourself, there's probably something wrong. And the other tip I'd actually sort of recommend to companies is before you even think about scaling, first what you have to do, after you get the first customer, my tip is typically add a zero. Then after you get the first customer, go and focus on getting the next 10 customers. After you get 10 customers, focus on getting 100 customers. And the reason why this is helpful, it actually helps you systematically think about growth in a way that is not sort of like, it's in a way that's actually manageable. Once you have a couple sales, first, and this is a founder needs to sell at least the first 1 to 5 to 10 customers, you think about building a process around that, right? About how do you build this in a repeatable fashion. And so one of the things I actually think a lot about is this is actually we need to start documenting. And once you scaling, right, getting to sort of like 100 to 1,000 customers, this is actually probably the next hardest sort of stage. And so first of all, I tell you, use a CRM system. If you've raised a seed round or a Series A, there's a lot of great CRM systems like Pipedrive, Insightly. Salesforce does not make sense at this point in time. It's way too expensive, but there's a lot of very inexpensive CRM systems. And this is a great way for you to manage and think about building your funnel, right? This is how you actually see sort of what's happening with your customers. This is how you actually manage your team better and actually track what's happening with your customers. So very, very critical, build your funnel. And the other thing that you need to be thinking about is how do you build sort of like a good pipeline, right? And so Brian Tracy talks about the fact that keep your sales pipeline full by prospecting continuously, right? So using like sales development reps to go and like call and actually filter sort of people to bring in for your salespeople, right? Because always have more people to see than you have time to see them. And that's important for sort of like the more candidates you can actually look at, the actually more leverage you actually have, and the more activity you can actually provide for your salespeople. And most important thing, just as part of the sales process, this is what a lot of people do not do. They don't follow up. Do what you say you're going to do. If you say that you're going to send them the deck afterwards, send them the deck after. If you say you're going to call them in a week, call them in a week. These are all very basic things, but having built, like I said, almost 50 plus sales teams, and I've hired and fired more salespeople than a lot than I'd say most human beings probably should have. This is one of the biggest issues with salespeople is they don't follow up. A great salesperson does exactly what they say and they follow up. A bad salesperson, which is most salespeople, don't follow up at all. They just forget. All right? The other thing, process. Process is everything, all right? As you scale this business and you document everything, the process actually becomes very, very critical, all right? And this is actually, if you look at, I would say the biggest reason why I think US software companies actually dominate is because they're sales machines, right? They've actually built sales machines. That companies like Oracle, Salesforce, which are now dominant companies, they built in these incredibly well-tooled sales machines, right? They bring in new college graduates, train them after a year to turn them into sales machines. That is what makes the US as a unique sort of market and makes Silicon Valley very, very unique. And so to close off, and I hope this has been helpful and useful for you, ABC, right? So always be closing. This is from Glenn Gallagher and Ross. Strongly recommend this. You can actually YouTube this. But I hope this is helpful, and I hope you realize the value and importance of actually sales for all of your startups, and I wish you the best of luck.